Why do women who claim they want a sensitive partner often end up choosing the other guy? The one who speaks little, who appears to need nothing from anyone. If this scenario feels familiar to you, if you've always done the right things, listened attentively, remained constantly available, conceded in every disagreement just to keep the peace, and still watched that person drift away from you little by little, there's something I need you to understand before you continue with this video. It wasn't simply misfortune. It wasn't that she was confused about her own desires. It was something far more fundamental. Something connected to biology, to primal instinct, and to a side of yourself that you've likely been suppressing for years without even recognizing it. Over the next several minutes, you're going to hear ideas that probably challenge much of what you've been taught about being a good partner. And I want to be straightforward with you from the very beginning. Nothing I'm about to tell you involves manipulation, toying with another person's emotions, or approaching a woman as something to be won. If that's your objective, this video isn't for you. What you will discover here is an exploration of why excessive people-pleasing extinguishes attraction, why constant availability kills intrigue, and most importantly, how to reclaim a part of yourself that modern society has encouraged you to bury. Let's begin with something that might feel uncomfortable. For years, the message has been that being attractive means being predictable, endlessly agreeable, reachable at all hours, and willing to yield simply to dodge disagreement. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. No one wants a partner who's aggressive, self-centered, or a poor listener. However, there's a significant distinction between being a decent person and being someone without a spine, and that distinction largely determines whether others see you as a reliable partner or simply as someone who's there, hoping to be picked. Before we explore the deeper psychology, I'd like you to consider something. Think back to the last time someone treated you with such consistent, predictable kindness that you began to overlook it. I'm not necessarily referring to a romantic situation. It could be a coworker who always says yes, a friend who never disagrees, someone who never voices their own perspective out of fear of causing friction. Initially, that availability is valued, but as time passes, without any conscious decision on our part, we stop noticing it. Our brains are naturally inclined to focus on what represents uncertainty, on what hasn't yet been fully understood. And a completely foreseeable person with no rough edges, no resistance whatsoever, ceases to generate that mental engagement we call interest. Evolutionary psychology has been examining this occurrence for decades. This isn't merely my personal view, it's a pattern consistently observed in studies of attraction and bonding. The human brain, without our deliberate awareness, searches for indications that another person can maintain their composure, signs of emotional resilience, that they won't fall apart at the first hurdle, that they possess their own meaningful life, with direction and purpose beyond just the relationship itself. When those indicators vanish, when someone begins arranging their entire existence around earning another's approval, something shifts in how the connection is perceived. It ceases to feel like a meeting between two complete individuals and starts to resemble a wait. I want to take a moment to examine where this behavior originates because, without knowing its roots, genuine change is impossible. Most men who adopt this excessive people-pleasing pattern weren't naturally that way. They were conditioned to it. Many were raised in settings where adult approval depended on good behavior, avoiding conflict, and anticipating others' needs before recognizing their own. That child, who learned that love was attained by being useful, obedient, and as untroublesome as possible, matures into an adult who replicates that same dynamic in romantic partnerships, at work, and in friendships. This isn't a character defect, it's an emotional survival tactic that served a purpose at the time, but ultimately becomes counterproductive in adult life. This brings us to an idea I'd like to explore throughout this video. Carl Jung, one of the most significant psychologists of the 20th century, referred to something he called the shadow. The shadow comprises the traits we reject, conceal, and deem unacceptable, thus pushing them out of our conscious awareness. The trouble is, what we repress doesn't simply vanish. It merely slips beyond our control, and for many men, this suppressed shadow contains qualities like assertiveness, the capacity to say no, silence, an air of mystery, and self-assurance without needing to constantly explain it. I'm not advocating for cruelty, coldness, or mistreating anyone. I'm talking about the contrast between a man who exists to appease and a man who simply exists, fully, and who then chooses to share his life with someone. That difference is transformative, and we'll break it down into several concrete signals you can begin working on today. The first signal concerns eye contact. Maintaining someone's gaze without nervously averting your eyes communicates something no words can, that you're unafraid to be observed, that you have nothing to hide, that you're completely present in that moment. Most individuals, when they feel discomfort or insecurity, glance away almost instantly. It's an automatic, nearly instinctive action, and the other person's mind registers it, without either of them consciously thinking about it. Holding eye contact for a few seconds longer than usual, without overdoing it or making it feel like a challenge, conveys calmness. And calmness, in a world full of anxiety, is incredibly attractive. The second signal is silence. We live in a culture that praises filling every pause and empty space in conversation, as if silence were something to be avoided at all costs. But silence, used effectively, communicates confidence. When someone asks a question, and you pause for 2 seconds before replying, instead of rushing in to fill the gap, you're signaling that your words have weight, that you don't speak just for the sake of speaking, and that you consider your responses. This doesn't mean remaining completely quiet or becoming aloof. It means no longer fearing the space between words. The third signal, likely the most crucial, is the ability to say no. This sounds straightforward, but it's where most men struggle the most. Saying no to a plan that doesn't appeal to you, saying no to an unreasonable request, saying no without offering endless justifications or apologizing for having your own viewpoint. Every time you concede on something that genuinely matters to you simply to avoid conflict, you're subtly communicating my well-being is negotiable, my boundaries are flexible, and my time has no real value. This message, repeated over time, gradually diminishes the respect the other person holds for you, even if it appears generous in the moment. Let me illustrate with an example. No specific names, just based on recurring patterns. Picture a man who, whenever his partner proposes a plan, automatically cancels whatever he had intended to do, without even considering whether he actually wanted to. Initially, this looks like devotion and generosity. But over time, the partner begins to realize that this availability isn't driven by genuine desire, but by a fear of letting them down. And when the other person senses that your choices stem not from your own will but from a fear of losing them, the relationship ceases to feel like a partnership of equals. Without anyone intending it, it becomes an unbalanced dynamic, where one person bears the load and the other is carried. The fourth signal relates to your body and how you carry yourself through the world. I'm not referring to being aggressive or imposing your physical presence on anyone unwilling. I'm talking about moving with purpose, occupying the space that belongs to you without shrinking, without apologizing for your existence. Many men, without realizing it, adopt postures that constantly apologize, rounded shoulders, hurried strides, avoiding taking up room. The body speaks before words do, and a body that moves calmly, without urgency to prove anything, projects a confidence that no speech can emulate. The fifth signal is the most challenging: remaining composed when everything around you seems chaotic, when a problem arises, when an argument erupts, when tension escalates. The person who stays centered, who doesn't react with panic or a desperate urge to fix everything instantly, becomes an automatic point of stability. In stressful moments, the human brain instinctively seeks out the most grounded person in the room, and that stability isn't faked, it's cultivated. There's a sixth signal rarely mentioned in this type of content, and it's your relationship with your own time. A man who replies to messages instantly, without exception, at any hour, who rearranges his entire agenda to be immediately available, is conveying something very different from what he intends. He thinks he's demonstrating interest and commitment. In reality, he's communicating that his time holds no intrinsic value, that it can be interrupted at any moment without cost. Time is one of the scarcest resources, and how you protect it, or don't, says a great deal about your self-respect. This isn't about deliberately ignoring messages or playing games with response times as a tactic. It's about responding when you can offer your full attention, rather than interrupting every aspect of your life due to anxiety about replying quickly enough. There's also a seventh signal connected to humor and authenticity. Many men, in an effort to please, laugh at things they don't find funny, agree with opinions they don't share, and dilute every comment until it loses its original flavor. While it might seem harmless, the other person eventually senses that they don't really know who they're with, because every reaction seems calculated to please rather than being genuine. Laughing only when something truly amuses you, expressing disagreement when you feel it, and maintaining your own sense of humor, even when it doesn't always align with the other person's, are small gestures that signal a solid identity. Someone who doesn't need to completely merge with another to feel accepted. Now, I want to pause here because this is critical, and I don't want you to overlook it. None of this works if it becomes a mask, a performance you adopt to gain something from someone else without them genuinely knowing you. If you adopt these traits only as a strategy, as a temporary disguise to impress, the other person will eventually notice, because the gap between what you project and what you actually feel always surfaces. What I'm suggesting isn't an act. It's a reconciliation with yourself, with parts of your character you likely suppressed for years out of fear of seeming difficult, fear of not being loved, fear of rejection. And here, I want to share something personal. For a long time, I confused being a good person with having no boundaries. I said yes to everything, avoided any friction, and apologized even when I'd done nothing wrong. What I discovered over time is that this approach didn't just affect my relationships, it affected my relationship with myself. I lived in constant worry about others' opinions, constantly adjusting my behavior to avoid any disapproval, and that, over time, creates a profound emptiness, because you end up constructing a life that isn't truly yours, but one designed not to inconvenience anyone. I remember a specific period when I realized this in a rather uncomfortable way. I was in a group conversation. Someone presented an idea I strongly disagreed with, and instead of voicing my thoughts, I nodded along. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to create tension. Walking out of that meeting, I felt a vague unease I couldn't quite explain, as if I had betrayed something small but significant within myself. Over time, I understood that unease was the direct result of years of accumulated moments of saying yes when I wanted to say no, and that, in many ways, was the starting point for everything I'm sharing with you today. Change doesn't occur overnight. There's no switch you flip and suddenly become a different person. What exists is a process, and I want to outline 3 phases of that process, because I believe it's the most useful part of this entire video. The first phase is recognition. Before changing anything, you need to identify the specific areas of your life where you're suppressing your own voice. It might be at work, taking on tasks that aren't yours out of fear of saying no. It might be with family, silencing your opinions to avoid conflict. It might be in relationships, constantly conceding to maintain peace. The exercise here is simple but uncomfortable. For 1 week, pay attention to every moment when you say yes while actually wanting to say no. Just observe it without judging yourself yet. Write it down if necessary, on your phone or in a notebook, whatever works. Don't try to fix it immediately. Just gather data about yourself as if you were an outside observer studying your own behavior. The second phase is practicing in small doses. This isn't about waking up tomorrow and becoming a completely different person. That would provoke resistance from those around you, and you'd probably retreat because of how jarring the sudden shift feels. It's about choosing a small, low-risk situation and practicing there. Saying no to a plan you genuinely don't want to do, holding eye contact for 1 extra second in an everyday conversation, letting a silence pass instead of automatically filling it. These are small gestures, almost invisible to others, but they gradually rebuild your relationship with yourself. Here's a concrete exercise you can start today. The next time someone asks you for a favor you don't want to do, instead of automatically saying yes, give yourself 1 second of pause before answering. That second, seemingly trivial, is the space where your autonomy begins to emerge. The third phase is calibration, and this one is essential because it's where many men go wrong. Not every situation or person demands the same intensity. Someone who misreads firmness as aggression probably needs you to adjust your communication style, not to abandon your boundaries. And I want to be very clear about something I consider fundamental here. Calibration never means ignoring what the other person expresses or pushing when someone sets a clear boundary, or interpreting someone else's silence or discomfort as part of a game. Respecting other people's boundaries isn't optional or negotiable. It's the foundation everything else rests on. The confidence we're cultivating here is measured by your ability to hold yourself together, not by your ability to bend another person to your will. I want to return to the science for a moment, because I think it's important to understand why all of this operates on such a profound level. Studies on social perception reveal something curious. People who describe themselves as more self-assured don't necessarily have fewer internal insecurities than others. The difference is that they've learned not to project that insecurity outward in every interaction. They don't constantly seek validation. They don't need every gesture from the other person to confirm they're okay, that they're enough, that they deserve to be there. And this emotional self-sufficiency, paradoxically, is what fosters deeper, genuine connection because it frees the other person from the burden of having to emotionally sustain someone else constantly. There's also research on what are called attachment styles, a framework originally developed to understand the bond between infants and caregivers, and now widely applied to adult relationships. People with a more anxious attachment style tend to need constant reassurance that they're loved, repeatedly check messages, and interpret any silence from the other person as a sign of rejection. People with a more secure attachment style, on the other hand, tolerate uncertainty better, trust that the bond can endure without constant confirmation, and precisely because of that, they generate a sense of stability that others find attractive. What's interesting is that attachment style isn't a fixed destiny. With conscious effort, it's possible to move toward a more secure attachment, and many of the practices we've described today, holding boundaries, tolerating silence, not needing constant approval, are exactly the kind of exercises that facilitate that shift. Think about this. When someone depends entirely on others' approval to feel good about themselves, every interaction becomes a test. The other person feels, even if they never voice it, that they have to carefully manage what they say and do to avoid hurting the other or triggering a crisis. That's exhausting, and over time, that exhaustion turns into distance, even if everything appears calm on the surface. In contrast, when someone has a solid foundation of self-worth, when they don't need every gesture from the other person to confirm their value, the relationship becomes a space of freedom rather than a constant exam. You can disagree without it becoming a tragedy. You can have a bad day without destabilizing the entire bond. You can express your thoughts without needing to soften them until they lose all meaning. I also want to address something almost nobody mentions in this kind of content. The mystery people often talk about isn't about withholding information or playing mind games. It's about having a life of your own so full, so engaging, that you don't need to reveal everything in every conversation. Real mystery comes from depth, not secrecy. A person who has projects, interests, friends, and a routine that gives them meaning naturally appears intriguing because there's more to uncover. It's not a tactic. It's a natural outcome of having a rich life beyond the relationship. It's worth distinguishing here between two types of men who, on the surface, might seem similar, but are fundamentally different underneath. There's the man who stays quiet out of fear, because he doesn't trust that his opinion matters, because he'd rather disappear than risk conflict. And there's the man who chooses silence, because he doesn't feel the urge to fill every space, because his confidence doesn't depend on constantly talking. From the outside, both might appear quiet, but one acts from fear and the other from choice. And that internal difference, though invisible at first, eventually shows because fear generates tension and choice generates calm. And this brings me to what I consider the most important point of this entire video. Nothing we've discussed should be done by thinking first about how it will affect another person. It should be done because you deserve to live with integrity, with clear boundaries, with a healthy relationship with yourself. If you develop these traits only as a tool to attract someone, that purpose will eventually fade, because there's nothing more exhausting than maintaining a version of yourself designed solely to please someone else. Work on this for yourself first. The natural consequence of that, almost always, is that the relationships around you improve, not because you're manipulating anything, but because a person who respects themselves naturally attracts healthier, more balanced connections. I also want to address a doubt that's probably arising as you listen to this. You might be thinking, what if I do all of this, and the relationship still doesn't work out? What if I set boundaries and the other person pulls away? That's a real possibility, and I'm not going to promise otherwise. But consider this: if someone pulls away precisely when you start respecting yourself, that relationship was probably built on a foundation that wasn't healthy for either of you. This isn't about guaranteeing that every relationship improves with these changes. It's about the fact that wherever you apply this, you end up becoming a more complete, more stable person, and that, sooner or later, naturally filters the kind of bonds that stay in your life. Before wrapping up, I want to leave you with something to reflect on. The next time you feel the urge to concede on something that genuinely matters to you, just to avoid a moment of discomfort, pause for a second. Ask yourself whether that concession comes from a genuine desire to be generous, or from an old fear of not being enough. That distinction, small as it seems, is the starting point for everything we've discussed today. The path toward a firmer, more secure, more complete version of yourself isn't traveled in a day, a week, or by watching a single video. It's traveled by choosing, again and again, to hold your boundaries even when it's uncomfortable, to sit with silence when you would have once filled it out of anxiety, to say what you actually think, even when there's a risk not everyone will like it. No one else can walk that path for you. And the good news is that every small choice in that direction gradually rebuilds the most important relationship you'll ever have, the one with yourself. If you made it to the end of this video, comment, "I made it," and I'll personally reply to you myself. And if it resonated with you, subscribe to be part of this and hit like if you enjoyed it.